In this film, I'm going to talk about infographics, and everyone is required to do at least one infographic. You can do more if you want, or actually, I should specify that one drawn complex infographic or three simple automated infographics. And we'll look at examples of both. And I should say that infographics is a big field for designer. There are designers whose career is made up of doing nothing but infographics. Some of them are on staffs of news organizations or television. Some of them are involved in animated infographics. It's a very big field with a lot of potential. And some students in the past have embraced infographics and really made it part of their magazine's brand, and others do the minimum. But either approach is fine. So by simple infographics, what I mean is things that you type numbers into Illustrator and you get an infographic out. You have some options for styling that infographic after it is generated, and I'll talk about those in another film, but something like this is just created by selecting pie chart, and that's what this is because it has slices like a pie, and typing some numbers in, and you get this out of Illustrator, and then you can style it a little bit so that it matches your color scheme. And the same is true of this guy down here. That's just a bar chart. You just select the bar chart and type numbers. The process is exactly the same as creating an infographic, a pie chart. And this is what's called a stacked bar chart, but here it's kind of functioning exactly like a pie chart. And infographics, if they're colorful and if they are used in together, they can be an effective way of illustrating. So effective, and this happens to be my work. I'll show you a couple examples of my work with this lecture, that it's used on the cover. It's like it's sort of a way of saying this is serious, this is data driven, this is a little bit different than our usual sort of cover. And this is the inside of that same issue. And infographics, big numbers are not an infographic, but they can be effective when combined with infographics. Tables, these are tables. They're not particularly infographics, but they can be combined with infographics and can create a effective page like this one. Now, a more complex drawn infographic would be something like this. This is also my work from my same time of my life when I was creative director of City Paper. And this is a decision tree, and this brings us to one of the big differences for infographics and what most editorial designers would do, which is when you're creating a article, whether it's a short article or a long article, and we're going to be doing both, but when you're creating an article, you're creating something, you're starting with a text that starts at the top of the page and then flows till it gets to the bottom, essentially, whether that's several pages later or a column later or two columns later. It's a linear sort of thing. With infographics, you can tell a story in a way that is not linear. So, here you start at the top, upper left, where people are used to reading and also where yellow, and it has a leading question I'm nostalgic about, and you have two choices and ways to go, Baltimore or Los Angeles. Now, the thing about this is the real reader of this is not necessarily nostalgic for either of these places. But because of the question, you're learning something about the destination when you get there. So I'm feeling like, so that you have a choice of Korean or Mexican. And the question is, are you sure? And the no in both cases get you to Ta Korean, which is a Asian Korean taco place. But if you're sure that you're feeling like Mexican, it takes you to District Taco. And so you can go down as many of these paths as you want, and they're sort of like choose your own adventures. The reader has freedom to read this in the way, in the manner in which they want. I mean, the reader always has freedom to not read it, but it's a non-linear story. There are different ways to go, and that's a little bit true for this. Not as true, but one could, dance around this arrangement of infographics. They can choose some of them and ignore others of them. It doesn't invite a clear beginning, start to finish approach. Another type of drawn infographic is the timeline. This is the last one that is my work from a completely different project. This one is charting the history of a Chicago high school. And what it's doing that's kind of interesting is it's talking about events in the life of that high school. So that high school was downtown and it moved a few times. So here's the date when it moved to 537 South Dearborn Street. But it's also putting the events of the high school, which no longer exists, in the context of what else was going on in the world at the time. So 72, the Sears Tower, the tallest building in Chicago, opened. Richard Nixon was elected. Somewhere in here, Barack Obama first moves to Chicago during the time that high school was open. Nate was the beloved principal, and that's when he left. And so it's a way of presenting information. And timelines can be visual. This one happens to be just text, but this one, actually, this is a couple of timelines talking about maturing of hippie 60s fashion, and it is illustrating that history with actual examples of clothing. Sometimes a infographic can be a combination of numbers and pictures. So this is just about the number of animals in New York City, and so there's almost 5,000 foxes. I suspect the squirrel count is probably per square mile than total for the city, and how many Canadian geese. And this, like several of the other forms, you can read in any order you want. You can say, oh, the geese are in the foreground, they're biggest, or you could say, oh, I didn't know they had foxes, or I didn't know we had any wolves in New York City. And so you can select and choose, but there's not one exact way to read this. This is a different iteration of Esquire than the one I showed at the different lecture, and this is, but that feature that we talked about in that earlier video, the rules, is part of this, and this is an illustrated version of the rules. And that's perfectly fine. If you have drawing skills and you want to do an illustrated infographic, you can. And I also just wanted to show you, and this is not really data visualization, but it's something that you can certainly make part of your magazine, here is a quiz. Will you be seeing Oblivion? And there's a bunch of questions, and how you answer them and how they get scored tells you whether you are likely to see this movie or not when it comes out. And it's not an infographic, but I encourage you to think about stories that are a little bit more interactive and do give the reader a chance to participate in the experience. And like the decision tree, a quiz is just kind of a sneaky way of giving you information or telling jokes about this movie. So if you have more than 40 points, you'll be seeing Oblivion in IMAX. 10 to 20 points, you'll be seeing it. And then less, you'll not be seeing it. And so even though that's not an infographic, I do encourage you to think about things like quizzes and that sort of thing if your topic is conducive to it. Sometimes an infographic can just be a photograph that is annotated. And this is New York Magazine. Get that a little bigger. Yes, we can. And this was about flight delays coming in and out of New York. And so here we have just a bunch of planes stacked up on the runway waiting to take off. And we have a list of those planes, which are numbered on the photo, and how late they were getting to their destination. Sometimes an infographic can describe the physical world. So after Katrina, and when New Orleans was greatly damaged, this was talking about the problems of natural defenses, coastal defenses, versus levees and canals, and how the natural defenses are better. And it's showing the simplified version of what wetlands and how that functions compared to the levee and canal system. This is also New York Magazine, and I've seen multiple versions of this, but New York was the best. This is a bit of an old one, unfortunately. But this is just two axes that get us from brilliant to despicable and highbrow to lowbrow. And this is kind of fun because wherever something goes on this chart is a comment on what that is. So if we zoom in at despicable and lowbrow, in the corner we have Meek Mills again tries to take on Drake, 50 Cent. Doesn't he know what the word meek means? And then up here you see like higher end things or books, as opposed to what you'd consider higher culture. And so we have Alexandro Alpina's big digitally derived canvases at Johnson Vote Gallery. Is something they're taking a happier look at, or a more approving look at. This is a history of pop's haircuts, and this was kind of fun. It's something that I hadn't thought about, how much hair is important for branding performers. And so a lot of these, you can just look at the hair itself and you know who it is. So for example, where was Snoop Dogg? Well, there's Gene Simmons of Kiss, fairly unmistakable, and a lot of these haircuts are, there's Snoop Dogg, fairly unmistakable. This is a magazine that was sort of a reinvented spy magazine. Not that you probably know what that was, but it was kind of they were both adult humor magazines that focused on celebrities and news. So this was a famous New York restaurant that has since closed, the Four Seasons Bar and Grill. And what they did was they interviewed the maitre d' and asked him where he would seat certain famous people, because this restaurant it was known for celebrities, and it was known for a place to go to see and be seen. And so they gave them a list of celebrities and who would you give the best seats. And so they show a map of the restaurant's dining room and where they're put. And this was, of course, years before Donald Trump was president. But it says Donald Trump comes here often and always gets a very nice table. He says hello to everybody. Everybody wants to shake his hand. They all want to be fired by him, I guess. And even something as banal as toilet paper can make an infographic. So here's a brief history illustrated, and other toilet paper facts. And this is a very famous infographic. And what this is a depiction of Napoleon's march across Europe and ultimately to Moscow, and what happened to the size of his army as he went. And Napoleon was famously beaten at Moscow, but the story this map tells is, he was really beaten before he got to Moscow. So if we look at this army leaving Paris or wherever they left from and how big it is, the thickness of the bar represents how big it is. And you could see it getting slimmer and slimmer and slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. And then the black is the retreat, the black bar. And we could see the army is really just about the same size at the retreat as the advance. They just didn't have anything in them anymore. But as they retreat, they continue to get smaller and smaller and smaller until this tiny fraction of the army that left hobbles back home 18 months or 2 years later, or however long this took. And what's kind of neat about this one is that it tells a story through data visualization that really could not be told with words. It tells it much more dramatically and viscerally than you could do it with words. And it also is a form that, is not is invented just for this. It's very distinctive and unique, and sometimes that is the case with infographics, is you can come up with something that's a little bit different than anyone else came up with before, if that's where the data that you're showing is leading you. And finally, I think this is finally Wired Magazine. Yes, that's my last slide from Wired Magazine. And this is just another example of the way data can be combined. And what's kind of neat, what I want to point out, there's a bunch of cool things going on this page, but what I wanted to point out here was the bottom. And these are kind of like double pie charts. What they're comparing is the number of calories on average people eat in each country, and also what those calories are composed of. So we have a little color key down here. I like to avoid color keys if I can, but sometimes you can't avoid them. So blue is meat. And we could see that China is eating like relatively fewer calories and a relatively smaller percentage of meat. Iceland is eating relatively more calories and a slightly bigger percentage of meat. And here's the USA. Oh, and I think we're also comparing the 70s to today. And so we can see that Americans are now eating quite a bit more calories, almost 4,000 calories a day. And that's the percentage of it that's meat. So it's a way of doing multi-levels of comparison, both country to country, era to era, and like that. So that's kind of a really elegant way of comparing, of putting a lot of information in a relatively compact space. So everyone will be doing either the 3 simple pre-cooked infographics or one more drawn and conceptual one, or they can be combined, of course. And it can be somewhere in your magazine. The thing to note about it is that it can be with an article. Everyone's going to do a long feature. Or it could be in the brief section. In either case, though, it should be self-contained. It should have something like a headline above it. And if it's not self-explanatory, a little bit of text to explain what that infographic is and how it works. So in other words, if someone is flipping past your feature, I don't think I have an example of that, but if someone is just paging through the magazine, they should be able to read the infographic and its associated text and be able to understand it without reading an article nearby. But it can have an article nearby that is on that topic.